I'd like to first welcome you all to the UCL Energy Evening Seminar Series. Tonight, what we're going to be looking at, the focus of the Institute is on energy demand, and one of the real drivers of energy demand is how much energy people want, and we have various mechanisms for trying to understand that. So we'll be looking tonight at some of the public attitudes to UK's energy challenges. Before we do that, a little bit of housekeeping first. Health and safety, the fire exits are exactly back up the way you came in. So you will have come in from the street and down the stairs, just reverse that process to get out. We're not expecting any fire alarm tests, so if it does go off, we'll just follow up in an orderly manner. The drinks are not here after this seminar, so we'll be heading back to Central House. There are some maps over here on the table for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. Quite a large number of us are from the Energy Institute, so if you're going to follow the crowd, essentially we go back up through the doors, turn right, go along to Woburn Place, and then Central House is almost directly opposite. And then we'll be going up to the first floor for drinks after this. The other thing, if you are leaving after 7 p.m, and we anticipate that the drinks will run through, we'll finish here around 6:30, and then the drinks will run through to about 7:30. You will need a member of the Energy Institute to let you out. So there'll be quite a number of us scattered around the place, so just grab a member of the Institute and we can take you down and let you out through the front door. Before we start on the lecture, I'm actually going to call on Paolo to give an introduction to Ipsos and Ed and Antonia, because the contact here is through two of my colleagues in Paolo. So, Paolo, would you like to do it?
Thank you to everybody attending tonight. I'm really pleased to have Edward and Antonia giving you a talk. As mentioned, they are from Ipsos MORI. Probably Ipsos MORI doesn't need much of an introduction, but anyway, founded late 60s and recently acquired by MORI. And MORI, as you know, is a kind of international social research firm. Therefore, now Edward and Antonia and their team have got international reach in terms of the research. Antonia and Edward lead the environment team at Ipsos MORI, and between them they have more than 20 years experience and a number of people working for them, a team about 8. They have worked for the usual suspects, so DEC, DEFRA, UK Energy, the Environment Agency, and a number of others, I think RAP maybe. Ian and I have the pleasure of working with them in 2 evaluations, one related to CESP and CERT, and the other to Warmfront. And it's really interesting actually when you bring a kind of the academia world and the kind of a more consultancy world together, because we're really playing to each other's strengths, and we really see what the kind of the advantages of either institution is and how we can complement each other. So I believe it's a really successful partnership. Thank you.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting us along. Thank you for the introduction, Paolo. Just before I say a little bit more in terms of what we'll cover today, just to kind of introduce ourselves. So my name's Edward. I am the Head of Environment Research at Ipsos MORI, been working in the research industry for the last 15 years. I started off doing research for booksellers, which probably dates me a bit, because I don't think there are any booksellers now. I then moved into to Ipsos UK, where I was doing research for the radio stations, and then moved into the social research division, been focusing on environmental issues since about 2005, and since 2008 I've headed up the environment research unit and cover a whole variety of different topics related to sustainability, so from climate change through to food waste to flooding. The food waste is a bit of the less glamorous side of it, I should say.
I'm Antonia. I work alongside Ed in the environment team and have done for the last 6 years. I primarily direct research for Department of Energy and Climate Change. I tend to focus on things to do with energy consumption within the home and attitudes and behaviours of people within their homes. So studies about smart metering, the renewable heat incentive, energy efficiency obligations, that sort of topic.
Okay. Right, so in terms of today's presentation, we'd like to cover 3 core areas. So focusing what the public think about the key challenges facing the UK energy sector. And then looking at both supply and demand. So what the levels of public acceptability in terms of renewables and nuclear as a way of meeting our energy needs, and also the public's willingness to undertake activity themselves to manage their own demand, and the levers that can potentially encourage behaviour change. We'll be discussing findings from a range of studies, so this includes work for Cardiff University, and also DEC, Energy UK, and indeed some of Ipsos MORI's research that we funded ourselves. So firstly, looking at what the public think about the key challenges facing the energy sector and what the barometer of public opinion is. So there's a number of challenges there that we've set out that government and industry face. So climate change mitigation through to developing a low carbon economy, ensuring a secure supply in terms of energy, and indeed an affordable supply in terms of the people being able to afford their energy bills. So taking the biggie first, if you like. So in terms of climate change, we know from research over a number of years for Cardiff University that that belief in climate change, that the majority of the public do believe that the world's climate is changing, but the proportion has declined from 2005. So 91% believing that the climate is changing back then, now only 72% as of 2013. In addition, we've also looked at concern. So those who, the proportion of the public who claim to be very or fairly concerned has gone from 82% in 2005 down to 60% in 2013. So mirroring obviously the decline in those who think it's happening or not. So why has there been this fall in concern? So a couple of issues that we would potentially point to from certainly some of the qualitative research that we've done. We know that the public sometimes find it hard to distinguish between weather events and climate, and so sort of broader climate trends. So their reference point is often the most recent weather seasons that they've experienced. So obviously in 2012-13 we had a very definite sort of cold snap there. It was a cold winter. And so people still associate the term climate change with global warming, and so I think those sort of kind of cold winters sometimes feel counterintuitive to the idea of climate change. And then also the media as well, so the balance of opinion that's represented within the media in terms of if you have someone sort of talking around climate change, there's almost this assumption that you need to provide a skeptic as well, and so I think that can send mixed messages to the public, and that is something that they reflect back. A further reason is, of course, other underlying issues or concerns that the public have. At Ipsos MORI, we've actually we have a survey called the Issues Index, which we pretty much do every month, and it dates back to the late 70s. And we look at, ask the public what they see as being the most or key issues facing Britain today. Not surprisingly, the economy tops the bill, and indeed it has done since the financial crash. Other key issues are unemployment, obviously related to the economy, and also immigration is another issue that cuts through as well. We then have a kind of sort of second tier of issues. In fact, the environment is not actually even in the top 10 there as an issue that the public refer to. We have seen that there is a decline then in the public referencing. So if we go back to the period sort of 2005 to say 2010, it's kind of around the 5 to 10% mark, but now it's sort of below that sort of 5% over the last few years. Interestingly as well, that decline in people actually referencing the environment as a key issue is not simply, cuts across the public. So we looked at newspaper readership here, and we can see that your Guardian readers, who you may well expect to be the kind of sort of bastions in terms of sort of pro-environmental behaviours and concerns, certainly for them the environment is a more important issue, and has been up there in the kind of low 20s, but actually again that's declined to around sort of 10% in recent times. The Sun is an entirely different story there. So moving on from climate change to one of the other challenges that we flagged earlier, so moving towards a low carbon economy. And before the 2010 election, we did some research where we did message testing for a number of environmental charities. And one of the statements that we tested was that our world is changing. In a time of recession, investment in developing greener form of energies will create new jobs and economic opportunities. And that was a message that it tested reasonably well, but at the same time there was scepticism about the idea of a sort of low carbon economy. People questioned how many jobs would be created. They questioned for whom those jobs would fall, would be appropriate for. Essentially, were they jobs for people like me? And also, what about people losing jobs in conventional energy sector? So there is some doubts, if you like, about the shift to a low carbon economy. Then moving on to one of the other challenges, which has obviously received a great deal of attention in recent weeks, which is the affordability of energy. And obviously we've got Ed with his promise to keep prices frozen for sort of after the 2015 election. And that certainly is something that reflects, if you like, householders' concerns. Over 4 in 5 expressed concerns about their household energy bills. 84% in total, either very or fairly concerned. And indeed, 81% say that they want to reduce their energy usage. And indeed, that can be for a mixture of reasons, partly financial, but will, as we'll highlight later, also motivated by ideas around waste and, to an extent, the environment as well. The final challenge that we flagged was the security of supply. And again, concern is raised around this. So 81% say that they are concerned that in the future we'll become too dependent on energy from other countries. They don't want to be held ransom by Mr. Putin on his horse there, thankfully with his shirt on there. So we spared you that one at least. And in addition, roughly the same proportion are concerned about the supplies of fossil fuels running out. So this research was done back in 2010 for Cardiff University. Just a quote there from another piece of research that kind of illustrates that concern, and interestingly puts it in relation to climate change. But the climate change or not, fossil fuels are going to run out, so I do use low energy bulbs. I've got double glazing, insulation and cavity walls. There's not much more I can do other than train myself to put only one cup in the kettle. And also interestingly, Brits care much more than other nations about energy security. So this is from our Global Omnibus, Global Advisor, which runs across a number of different countries. And we asked the public across those different nations what they felt were the key environmental issues facing their nation, and this was from a list of about 15 different possible issues. And energy security topped the bill for Britain, and indeed we were only behind Sweden and Germany in highlighting energy security as a key issue. Just to say there that the field work was actually done prior to the earthquake and the Japanese earthquake and the Fukushima incident.
Sorry, could we just turn this screen that better?
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to come on to talk about what the public think about how we address these challenges. How supportive are they of different measures in terms of tackling how we supply energy and also the way that we demand it? So firstly, looking at how acceptable nuclear and renewables are as a way of meeting our energy needs. Well, we've asked people how favourable they feel or unfavourable they feel towards different ways of generating electricity. And you can see here that most people are more favourable towards renewables than they are towards traditional fossil fuels. That said, our trend data, because we've done this survey 3 times, 2005, 2010, and most recently earlier this year, show that actually favourability towards renewables has fallen quite a bit in relation to all 4 of those technologies. Now, since these results were published earlier this year, I haven't actually seen too much evidence about why that might be, but I'd probably hypothesise 3 main reasons, which we could discuss later, perhaps. One, the falling concern around climate change, as Ed has already mentioned. So cleaner, greener technologies that help meet our carbon reduction commitments are not quite as persuasive if you don't believe that climate change is really happening. 2, possibly a question around reliability. So are the public really convinced that these technologies are going to meet the energy gap that we might have? And 3, what about the investment that is needed to get these technologies really at a scale that is going to help meet the energy gap, and the fact that investment might be passed on to individual energy bills, linking into the affordability issue, and the green obligations that may or may not be increasing the prices we pay to energy suppliers is something we've seen in the news a great deal this summer.
Sorry, which is the energy source from the bottom?
Yeah, so the one missing is nuclear, which I was just going to come on to in the next few slides to talk about the sort of ins and outs of where we've got to on the nuclear debate among the public. And before I do that, I'd just point out gas. So that's really held up, although it is perceived less favourably than renewables. The support for that isn't falling like it is in the renewable sector. So it's something to think about. So yeah, moving on to nuclear then. Well, you might expect after the Fukushima incident that support for nuclear could fall, but actually in Britain it has stayed remarkably stable. We did see a very small blip in the few months following the accident, but it's returned to the same level as it was before. And in fact, now in Britain, we see that more people believe that the benefits of nuclear outweigh the risks. And this is the first point that we've tracked that opinion. We can also see that concern has fallen from 2005 until today. So the support for nuclear really does seem to be there and is building among the public. And on balance, when we ask the public whether they support new nuclear power stations being built to replace those that are being decommissioned over the coming years, on balance, they're just about outweighing the opposition. That said, there are some grey segments there, which are people who either don't know or haven't formed an opinion yet, or they neither agree nor disagree. And so obviously which way they swing is going to be quite important in terms of which way the public falls on the issue. The key thing that those people in grey probably need to hear more about is evidence about the risks of nuclear power and helping them come to a decision about how acceptable those risks are. So 55% agree that if we had safer nuclear power stations, I'd be prepared to support new ones being built. And there's of course still the issue about where these new stations are built, and probably even more importantly, where we dispose of the radioactive waste. And over half of the public have a NIMBY, not in my backyard attitude to where those locations are sited. And although we do have a fifth of people also saying the same for wind, you can see it's more extreme in the case of nuclear. It's interesting to think about the frame in which you talk about energy choices when you put them to the public. And it might be that climate change is no longer the most effective hook with which to do that. So we've asked people how willing they are to accept new nuclear power stations on the condition that it helps tackle climate change. And the fall in agreement with that statement, I'd suggest, is more to do with the fall in concern about climate change than it is to any fall in support in nuclear, given the results that we've just seen. So in terms of how this all builds together into a story about public preferences around the UK's energy mix, well, it's obvious that renewables and nuclear are understood to be part of the solution. However, renewables and favourability towards them is perhaps on the decline. It'll be interesting to see whether that continues the downward trend or whether it stops, potentially because of increasing concern about the impact on billing, potentially about the weakening concern for climate change. And although there is support for nuclear, there is still concern around safety. So it seems that perhaps there's a need to reframe the renewables, the need for renewables as a way of tackling energy security. So perhaps the public aren't seeing that link towards more micro-generation, or even at a national scale, our own generation of renewable energy rather than reliance on fossil fuels from elsewhere. And perhaps there's a need for a balanced debate about the risks of nuclear, particularly in the media, to help the public weigh up that for themselves. So coming on to look at what the public are willing to do themselves to address energy demand. Well, whilst they are quite accepting of a broad energy mix at a national scale, when it comes to their own homes, we're definitely still very wedded to gas and our gas boilers. And it doesn't seem that there is much awareness or willingness to move to alternative forms of energy within the home. These results are taken from a study I did with DEC about more efficient heating systems. We asked people spontaneously what type of heating system they might consider in the future if their current system broke down. And obviously the vast majority, over 80%, said a gas boiler, with very, very small numbers mentioning something like biomass or ground source heat pumps. We do have aspirations to reduce how much we use though, even if that was to continue to be gas. So around 3/4 have tried to reduce the amount of energy they use at home, and 6 in 10 think that there's more that they could do to reduce the amount they use at home. And that quote just sums up what we always hear from consumers, which is that they have a real ethos about not wasting electricity and gas, about not wasting things unnecessarily. And that's almost as important as trying to reduce bills in terms of why they're thinking about energy efficiency. There are, of course, lots of sort of nudges or mechanisms that can be used to try and help people use less energy and change their behaviours, some of which are shown here. So these are things like laptops and computers automatically turning off if they've been left on standby for a significant amount of time, your shower turning off after you've been in it for 10 minutes, you can probably state that time for yourself, or maybe even overnight your fridge or freezer being turned off automatically by your electricity operator. Now, as those interventions appear to become more intrusive, the acceptability of them falls, as you might expect. But this is something that is obviously going to have to be tackled and communicated with the public as the smarter grid becomes something that's more talked about. In terms of where the public place responsibility for making some of these changes to our energy system, well, they think it firmly is placed on government. I was quite interested actually when I saw this data that it wasn't energy suppliers that landed more of the responsibility, which could be expected. But I think it must be that because affordability is such a key issue that the public see in the energy sector, they just don't believe that energy suppliers are the people who are going to be tackling that. And they really feel it needs to be a government lead to push the suppliers to help with the affordability of supply. Probably the same argument for renewables. If they're needed, they may feel that it's government who need to push for that rather than the suppliers themselves. And then we get 13% of individuals